pushing people into believing certain things. And would it actually, there you go, would it actually push people to asking the wacky ideas and the wacky questions that wouldn't get funded because they're so far outside the norm? So this piece in The Atlantic caught my attention. America needs a new scientific revolution. A repurposed antidepressant might help treat COVID-19, a remarkable study found. The way this research was funded highlights a big problem and a bigger opportunity in American science. I was curious about it. I actually haven't read it all the way through, so I have no idea what he's going to say, but I'm going to have a look at it. Two stories in science are worth cheering right now: the amazing amount of knowledge humanity is gathering about COVID-19 and the quietly revolutionary ways we're accelerating the pace of discovery. First, the knowledge. Last week, a large clinical trial concluded that the cheap antidepressant drug fluvoxamine dramatically lowers the chance that people with COVID-19 will get hospitalized or die. Huh! I did not know about that. And I'm betting we all know why we didn't know about that. Researchers found that patients who took the drug for at least 8 days saw a 91% reduction in the death rate. Damn. Some days I hate medicine because I can't pronounce the words. Fluvoxamine, which has been used for decades to treat depression and obsessive-compulsive disorder, also reduces inflammation, which alerted scientists to its potential to calm the immunosystem storms caused by COVID-19. So one of the things severe COVID does is it overinflames your lungs, and that's what causes people to end up on ventilators because they can't breathe because their lungs are super inflamed and the normal process can't happen. Quote, "This is exciting data," Daniel Griffin, the chief infectious disease at the healthcare provider network ProHealth New York, told the Wall Street Journal. Quote, "This may end up being the standard of care." So far, so wonderful. What makes this study even more remarkable were the 6 boring-sounding words in the paper's acknowledgments. This trial was supported by FAST grants. What's that? Good question. I don't even know. Last year, in the chaotic opening innings of the coronavirus pandemic, the George Mason University economists Tyler Cowen and Patrick Collison, the CEO of the payment processing company Stripe, co-founded a new program for quickly funding scientific research on COVID-19. They called it FAST Grants. Pulling together a small team of early career scientists to vet several thousand ideas, they sent out the first round of money in about 48 hours. In 2020, they raised more than $50 million and awarded more than 260 grants that supported research on saliva-based tests, long COVID, and clinical trials for repurposed drugs, including fluvoxamine. I'm going to keep getting that wrong. So that's kind of cool, actually. One of the things I'm trying to get away from doing. I've talked about this on Locals Only so far, but one of the things I think we need to do very badly as a scientific institution is to get away from having the federal government fund almost everything science-wise right now, because that is what happens. There's so many grants that are funded for different universities and NGOs and what have you, that the grant funding comes from the federal government agencies. From the January-February 2021 issue, How Science Beat the Virus. Like many new ideas, FAST Grants is an innovation embedded in a critique of the status quo. Like what I just said, most scientific funding in the United States flows from federal agencies such as the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. This funding is famously luxurious. The NIH and NSF allocate about $50 billion per year. It is also infamously laborious and slow. Scientists spend up to 40% of their time working on research grants rather than on research. Very true. And funding agencies sometimes take 7 months or longer to review an application, respond, or request a resubmission. Anything we can do to accelerate the grant application process could hugely increase the productivity of science. One of the problems, and I guarantee you it might be longer right now with that, because one of the problems is that some agencies won't even tell you if you won a grant unless they have the budget from Congress. And if Congress is a mess, like it has been the last couple of years, it means everybody's grant agency, all the different agencies and what have you, get thrown totally out of whack because they don't know how much money they will have to send out, how much money they will have to spend on grant proposals, funding somebody else's grant proposal and things like that. They don't know because Congress hasn't allocated the budget for them. So things like that happen too. The existing layers of bureaucracy have obvious costs in speed. They also have subtle costs in creativity. The NIH's pre-grant review pre-grant peer review process requires that many reviewers approve an application. This consensus-oriented style can be a check against novelty. What if one scientist sees extraordinary promise in a wacky idea, but the rest of the board only sees its wackiness? Very true. The sheer amount of work required to get a grant also penalizes radical creativity. Many scientists, anticipating the turgidity and conservatism of the NIH's approval system, apply for projects that they anticipate will appeal to the board rather than pour their energies into a new idea that, after a 500-day waiting period, might get rejected. This is happening in an academic industry where securing NIH funding can be make or break. Since the 1960s, doctoral programs have gotten longer and longer, while the share of PhD holders getting tenure has declined by 40%. FAST grants aimed to solve the speed problem in several ways. Its application process was designed to take half an hour. Damn. Many funding decisions were made within a few days. This wasn't business as usual, it was Operation Warp Speed for science. In the past few years, I've had many conversations with entrepreneurs, researchers, and writers about the need for a new scientific revolution in this country. These thinkers have diagnosed several paradoxes in the current U.S. science system. First is the trust paradox. People in professional science circles like saying that we believe the science. Thank you that you put it in quote. But ironically, the scientific system doesn't seem to put much confidence in real-life scientists. In a survey of researchers who received FAST grants, almost 80% said they would change their focus a lot if they could deploy their grant money however they like. However they liked. More than 60% said they would pursue work outside their field of expertise against the norms of the NIH. Quote, the current grant funding apparatus does not allow some of the best scientists in the world to pursue research agendas that they themselves think are the best. Colson Cohen and UC Berkeley scientist Patrick Hsu wrote in the online publication Future in June. Some major funders have placed researchers in the awkward position of being both celebrated by people who say they love the institution of science and constrained by the actual institution of science. Yes, I would very much actually agree with this. There is a lot of things that are required here when you do a regular old-fashioned grants process. And one of the thing about it is you're very much required to allocate to everything. The other thing is that you are responding to a very specific proposal call from from any request for proposals that you get from an agency. You're asked to answer specific things or focus on specific areas. And that doesn't necessarily lend itself to a whole lot of creativity, unless it's a problem that you also agree is a problem and you have a novel way of approaching it, or a novel question that you wanted to answer related to that. So that is a challenge. That's not to say the only thing that concerns me about things like FAST grants is who's overseeing that the money is getting used appropriately, because I'm thinking of things like I'm thinking of things that money could end up used for research and things that are illegal, unwise, any number of other different things that are immoral. You know what? Because science in its purest sense does not have a moral compass. It doesn't give anybody who practices it a moral compass. So you got to be careful with that in that aspect. Make sure it's a good grant that way. Second, there is a specialization paradox. Despite considerable domain specialization in the sciences, individual scientists cannot focus enough on doing hard research in their chosen field. Since 1970, the number of years the average PhD student in the biosciences spends in graduate school has grown from little more than 5 years to almost 8 years. Producing experts is taking longer, and those experts are getting less productive. In the famous paper, quote, Are Ideas Getting Harder to Find?, the Stanford University economist Nicholas Bloom and his colleagues found that research productivity has declined sharply across the board since the 1970s. Research from the University of Chicago scholar James Evans has found that as a number of researchers has grown, progress has slowed down in some fields, perhaps because scientists are so overwhelmed by the glut of information that they have to process that they're clustering around the same safe subjects and citing the same few papers. But in the bigger picture, today's scientists can't really specialize in science because so many of them are forced to devote at least one day a week to begging for money. In the FAST Grant survey, a majority of respondents said they spend, quote, more than a quarter of their time on grant applications, quote, end quote. This is absurd. It's the height of irrationality, wastefulness, or both that the U.S. education system takes great pains to train scientists to be monkish specialists, only to dump them into an arms race for scarce funding that elbows out the work of doing science. That's unfortunately quite true. There's a lot of time that's spent, unfortunately, writing grant proposals. Because I know there might be another one I might start on myself sometime here soon. A third feature of American science is the experimentation paradox. The scientific revolution, which still inspires today's researchers, extol the virtues of experiments, but our scientific institutions are weirdly averse to them. The research establishment created after World War II concentrated scientific funding at the federal level. Institutions such as the NIH and the NSF finance wonderful work, but they are neither nimble nor innovative, and the economist Cohen got the idea for FAST grants by observing their sluggishness at the beginning of the pandemic. Many science reformers propose spicing things up with new lotteries that offer lavish rewards for major breakthroughs or giving unlimited and unconditional funding to superstars in certain domains. Quote, "We need a better science of science," the writer Jose Luis Rincon has argued. Quote, "The scientific method needs to examine the social practice of science as well, and this should involve funders doing more experiments to see what works. In other words, we ought to let 1,000 FAST grants style initiatives bloom, track their long-term productivity, and determine whether there are better ways to finance the sort of scientific breakthroughs that can change the course of history." 400 years ago, the scientific revolution overthrew old ways of looking at the world and embraced experimentation over tradition. We could use a similar revolution today. The U.S. relies on a fleet of scientific agencies, the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, and NSF, that are decades old and that in many cases act their age. The CDC publishes excellent research, but it utterly failed to respond quickly and adequately in the face of a national emergency. The FDA protects Americans from some terrible medical products, but its protectiveness also deprives Americans of some very good and urgently needed products. The NIH and the NSF fund a lot of brilliant research, but their hegemony over scientific funding makes it hard to know whether we could be doing much, much better. American science needs more science. That means, above all, we need more experiments. We shouldn't have to depend on 20th century institutions to guide 21st century progress. The lesson of FAST grants is that we don't have to. So this is fascinating. I didn't know the thing FAST grants existed. I didn't know that was going on. I may consider it myself now, actually. Now that I think about it, because I am looking for alternative ways to fund what I do. But this is interesting, and I don't necessarily disagree. There's a lot of things about the way the institutions in which we do science, within which that we do science, that makes what science is ideally supposed to be very difficult. And part of it is the idea that, you don't have a whole lot of speed. But then again, I don't know anything I'm connected with the federal government that has a whole lot of speed, showing my bias there. This is interesting. And it gets at something that's been on my mind. It also, I wonder if it would also take away some of the groupthink. Because obviously different legacy funding agencies have their particular things that they want to focus on, regardless of what political administration is in power says. So my question would be, could something like FAST grants then take away the impetus of federal grant funding, focusing on particular things? Which is to say, could this kind of unconditional support that they're talking about take away from pushing people into believing certain things? And would it actually push people to asking the wacky ideas and the wacky questions that wouldn't get funded because they're so far outside the norm? And I got another paper, I got another thing here from Science that actually I'll go and do another video on, next video after this one, to talk about that, because I think that's also really interesting, the kind of issue that's going on there. So I don't know. I have wondered about this for a while, and I have been looking at new ways to do the funding, because honestly enough, it does come back to just following the money sometimes when it comes to these things. So I think this would be interesting to see. I would like to see more of what FAST grants is going to do, and I may look it up with respect to my own work and see if they would fund something interesting for me. We'll find out. But that's really curious. I like that. actually, and I think it really interestingly would be helpful, and I do think we need more science, not just necessarily because of the funding issue, but because the woke have done so much to mess with it. Anyway, that's it for me for this video. If you like this video, hit the like button on the way out the door, share the video, comment on the video, all that jazz. Subscribe to the channel. Come on over to shiosophia.locals.com, which you might see it under me on this screen. So that's it for now. Until next time, I'm Adrian. I hope you stay curious.